Hey everyone, and welcome. Today, we are diving deep into the hidden connections that tie every single living thing together. There's this idea that in nature, no organism is an island. And it's absolutely true. From the tiniest microbe to the biggest whale, everything is tangled up in this huge, complex, and honestly, pretty amazing web of life.
But I want you to really think about that for a second. Now seriously, can you picture a single animal, plant, anything that exists in a total bubble, needing nothing, affecting nothing? It's kind of tough, right?
And the reason it's so tough is, well, because it's impossible. A habitat like that just plain doesn't exist. I mean, even a plant that literally makes its own food still needs microbes in the soil to get nutrients, and it most likely needs a bee or a bird to come along and pollinate it. So yeah, it's pretty clear. Everything is connected to everything else.
So here's how we're going to untangle this whole web today. First, we're going to look at the simple scorecard ecologists use to keep track of all these relationships. Then, we'll dive into the drama of conflict, the weirdness of species living in close quarters, and the beauty of ultimate teamwork. And finally, we'll pull it all together to see the really big picture. Okay, so how in the world do you even begin to make sense of all these connections? Well, ecologists came up with this beautifully simple system. A plus sign means an interaction is good for a species. A minus sign means it's bad, and a zero means there's pretty much no effect at all.
And this table right here breaks it all down. Just think of it like a code. You see a plus plus? That means both species win. We call that mutualism. And a minus minus? That means both sides are losing out, which is what happens in competition. And then you've got your plus minus situations, like predation, where one benefits and the other, well, doesn't. We're going to go through all of these, but this simple plus minus and zero system is really the key to understanding the whole thing.
Let's start with the real high drama stuff, right? The interactions that are all about a direct struggle for survival, predation and competition.
Predation is that classic plus-minus relationship. A tiger and a deer, a bird eating a seed. It's pretty straightforward. One organism gets a meal, which is a huge benefit, while the other loses its life, a definite negative.
But here's the thing. Predators aren't just the bad guys. They are absolutely essential. They're like engineers for a healthy ecosystem. They keep prey populations from exploding, and this is the crucial part, they actually help maintain diversity. There was this famous experiment on the American Pacific coast that showed this perfectly. When scientists removed the predator starfish P. zoster, the whole ecosystem just collapsed. Within a year, more than 10 other species completely disappeared because their competitors, who were usually kept in check by the starfish, just took over everything.
Of course, the prey doesn't just sit back and let this happen. This whole dynamic has kicked off a massive evolutionary arms race. Prey have developed some truly incredible defenses. You've got insects and frogs using camouflage to blend in. The monarch butterfly actually becomes poisonous just by eating a certain weed when it's a caterpillar. And plants get in on the action too. They defend themselves with physical stuff like thorns or even chemical weapons. Think nicotine, caffeine, even opium, all produced to stop animals from eating them. All right, next up is competition. This is our minus-minus scenario. It happens whenever two or more species need the same limited thing, like food, water, or even just space. And here's the most important part to remember. In competition, nobody really wins. Even the species that gets the resource is worse off because it had to burn precious energy fighting for it. This whole idea leads to a fundamental rule in ecology, Gauss's competitive exclusion principle. It sounds complicated, but the idea is simple. If two species are competing for the exact same limited resources, they can't live together forever. Sooner or later, one is going to prove to be the better competitor and will win out, and the other species will just get pushed out of that habitat. But it's not always a fight to the death. Sometimes, nature is a little more clever. On the left, you see exclusion in action. On the rocky coasts of Scotland, this big barnacle, called Balanus, just completely outcompetes and shoves out the smaller Thamylus barnacle. But on the right, you see a totally different strategy, resource partitioning. An ecologist named Robert MacArthur noticed 5 different species of warblers all living on the same tree. How? Well, they avoided competing by splitting up the resources. Each species specialized in feeding on insects in a different part of the tree. They just found a way to share.
So we've seen open conflict. But what about the interactions that are a little more up close and personal? Now we're going to look at species that live in really tight physical contact, starting with parasitism.
First up, parasitism. This is another one of those plus-minus relationships. The parasite basically lives on or inside its host, getting free food and a place to stay. And this, of course, harms the host. It reduces its chances of survival, its growth, and its ability to reproduce. Think about lice on humans, or this weird plant called Cascuda, which has actually lost its own chlorophyll and just steals all its nutrients from whatever plant it's attached. And one of the most cunning examples of this has to be brood parasitism. The cuckoo bird, for instance, doesn't build its own nest. Instead, it lays its eggs in a crow's nest. The poor crow has no idea and ends up incubating the cuckoo's eggs and raising its chicks like they were its own. And in this crazy evolutionary game, the cuckoo's eggs have even evolved to look almost identical to the crow's eggs in size and color, all to avoid being discovered and tossed out of the nest.
Now for a much more neutral kind of close quarters relationship, commensalism. This is our plus-zero interaction. One species gets a clear benefit, and the other, well, the other is completely unaffected. It couldn't care less.
And once you start looking, you see this stuff everywhere. An orchid growing way up high on a mango tree? It gets better sunlight, which is a plus, but the mango tree is totally unaffected, a 0. Barnacles catch a free ride on the back of a whale, getting a mobile home and a constant source of food. The whale probably doesn't even know they're there. You've got cattle egrets that follow grazing cattle to gobble up the insects they stir up from the grass. The birds get a meal, the cows get nothing. And of course, the famous clownfish hiding from predators in the stinging tentacles of a sea anemone. The fish is safe and the anemone is completely unfazed.
All right, finally, let's get to the most cooperative and often the most fascinating interactions in nature, the ones where everybody wins.
This is mutualism, the ultimate plus-plus relationship. Both species get something good out of the deal. A classic example is lichens. They look like one organism, but they're actually a super tight partnership between a fungus and an alga. Another great one is mycorrhiza. These are fungi that live on plant roots. They help the plant absorb nutrients from the soil, and in return, the plant gives the fungi energy-rich food. It's a win-win.
Some of these mutualisms are so specialized, they show us this amazing process called coevolution. Just take a look at the fig tree and its partner wasp. Their relationship is so exclusive that the fig tree can only be pollinated by this one specific species of wasp, and in return, that wasp can only lay its eggs inside the fig's fruit. They are completely 100% dependent on each other for their survival.
And if you want a truly mind-blowing example of coevolution, you have to meet the Mediterranean orchid, Ophrys. This plant uses something called sexual deceit. It's incredible. One of its petals has evolved to look, feel, and even smell exactly like a female bee. So a male bee comes along, is completely fooled, and tries to, well, mate with the flower petal. In the process, he gets covered in pollen, which he then carries to the next orchid he gets tricked by. It's an amazing strategy for the orchid, while the bee probably just ends up very confused.
So we've looked at all these individual interactions, from conflict to cooperation. So what's the big picture here? What does it all add up to? Well, it's that all of life is woven together in this incredibly intricate and really delicate web.
So let's bring it all home with our little scoreboard of life. We've seen the win-win of mutualism, the lose-lose of competition, and all the one-sided relationships like predation, parasitism, and commensalism. These super simple symbols, the plus, the minus, and the 0, are literally the building blocks that create the structure for entire biological communities.
And that leaves us with one last thing to really think about. Remember that Peister starfish? We saw what happened when just one species was pulled out of the equation. It proves that these aren't just a bunch of separate events. They are all deeply interconnected threads. So the real question we have to ask ourselves is, when you pull on a single thread in this web, how many others start to unravel?